Hi, I'm Karen again. We're talking about the Viking 116 Emerald, and right now we're going to talk about the accessories. Your machine comes with two spool caps, a large one and a small one. The large one, of course, would be for using larger spools of thread. You don't want to use this large one on a narrow spool like this because then the thread has to climb up higher and you don't get a nice smooth flow. So use the small one for small spools, large one for large spools. Here we have the vertical spool pin, goes up there like that, and that's if you have a special kind of thread that needs to reel off the side rather than just spiral off the end. Also, if you're doing twin needle sewing, that's with a special needle that has two needles there, you'd have two spools of thread that you'd be using at the same time. Most of the time you don't want to be leaving this here because it is plastic, and if you put your cover on without removing this, you could break it. You don't want to do that. This little red disc here is to help keep the spool from continuing to spin once you are done sewing. It kind of acts like a little brick. So this little red felt thing, leave that right there on the spool pin. Here we have a cleaning brush, and we'll get into maintenance on your machine in the next video. And here we have the screwdriver. That's good for taking this screw off and also for loosening the needle clamp screw. Here we have a seam ripper. The seam ripper is good for taking out stitches. You would take your seam ripper, put it underneath a stitch, and it cuts the thread really nicely. And when you're using it, leave the cap on because that keeps it from rolling away. Okay, so put that back on there like that. Here we have the J-foot. The J-foot is wonderful for making stitches that stay nice and flat. So if you have fabric that tends to fray on the ends like this, you want to overcast your stitches. If you use a regular zigzag, with a regular zigzag foot, you tend to get a little bit of scrunching happening at the ends on a thin fabric like this. So if you use the J-foot, zigzag, using the J-foot, you get a nice flat stitch. So that's the J-foot. Then we have the A-foot, and I think I have the B-foot on here. Okay, the A-foot is your all-purpose foot. The A-foot and the B-foot look very similar. The only thing is on the back you can see the A-foot is flat and the B-foot has a channel. The channel that is there if you're doing a short zigzag where it's really close together and you're putting a lot of thread into that seam. For that, you want that to flow right through, and it has a little channel to do that. That's what your A-foot is for. Again, putting your different feet on here, this little bar right there is we put that right up next to the needle clamp, push that back, goes right on there. Make sure you have your thread under the foot. Another thing about these feet, I should show you that, is this is the little slit on the side where you put your thread to put it under the foot. You don't put it in this little cutout here because that's not going to make sure that your thread's under the foot. So as you're putting your thread under the foot, make sure you slide it right along that left-hand toe, just like this. Okay, here we have the zipper foot. Now the zipper foot can be put on either side of your foot, depending on which side of the zipper that you're sewing on. And for zipper sewing, that's more of a sewing technique, which is not something I'm going to be showing you right now, or in this video series. Here we have a buttonhole foot. Now this is for making really long buttonholes. We also have this buttonhole foot here. Now this looks kind of complicated, but really it takes a lot of the work out of making buttonholes. Buttonholes is also something I can show you later. Okay, and then we have the blind hem foot. Now blind hem is where you have stitches that barely show on the front of your fabric, and they're mostly stitched on the back. So this is for doing blind hems. This little red dial here moves the connector bar back and forth so you can get a really nice, accurate, almost invisible blind hem. Then we have the H foot, and the H foot is slick on the bottom. The nice thing about that is for sewing over vinyl or leather, anything that tends to be a little grippy, it will help slide right over there. It is actually identical to your A foot, except that it has this vinyl, this slick part on it. Now these little stickers, there should be couple of them around here, but these are little stickers that you can put on the bottoms of other feet to also make them non-skid, kind of like or make them slide nicely like your H foot. Okay, and then you have 3 bobbins that come with your machine. You can put bobbins right in here in your accessory case, side by side. 3 of them fit really nicely in there. Of course, we can also have a bobbin case or a ring or something like that to keep your bobbins in. You also have a set of needles. Now this is a variety pack that comes as an accessory to this machine. Normally you'd have to get stretched needles separately from universal needles. This universal needle, the universal needles have several different sizes from smaller to larger. That's what the numbers mean. And 75 always goes with 11, 80 always goes with 12, etc. One's a European number, one's an American number. You don't necessarily need to know that, but just remember, smaller the number, the smaller the eye of the needle, and the smaller diameter of the needle. Stretch would be for your stretch fabrics, especially good for anything that has spandex or sort of a really elasticy type fabric. The reason why you want to use a stretch needle for sewing stretchy fabrics is because it'll help you keep from skipping stitches. It'll make it easier for the needle to go through the fabric and the bobbin to catch that needle thread and make a stitch. Here we have the quilting bar, or the edge guide. It fits right in the back of the foot holder like that. And the neat thing about that is you can make parallel lines of stitches. Look how nice and parallel those are. You make your first line of stitching, move this over, follow your first line of stitching to make your second line of stitching, and you can make multiple lines of stitching. You could also make this closer together or further away, depending on the stitching you want to do. Okay, and that just slides right out like that. And then in your accessories, you also have a user guide, which is really handy to have to look for what the type of settings that you want to have, the type of foot to use, etc. You also have your foot pedal and the cord, and the power cord and the foot pedal are connected to the same plug right here, so they're not 2 separate cords, they're just together. Now when you are changing the feet, the manual does recommend turning off the power, which is fine. Now, if you turn off the power, of course, you're not going to have any light, but that'll prevent you from stepping on the foot pedal and accidentally sewing through your finger. You don't want to do that. Just for safety purposes, let's just reiterate, the needle is sharp. We already know that. But the needle has, when this is on, it has a motor behind it. So that's why it's really important to make sure that either you have your power off when you change your needle or your accessories, or to just make sure that you do not have your foot near the foot control. Also make sure your little kitty cat doesn't come and sit on it too. Okay, so that's basically it on accessories.